With that, let's get started. So as we've been doing the last few weeks, and we'll continue today in the next few weeks, we're all about finding your voice. And one of the most important ways to find your voice in modern Hebrew is the issue or the topic of commands and the command form, or the fancy word in English, the imperative. In English, it's a pretty simple thing to do, right? We usually have a verb and it's usually in one form like speak, talk, stop, go. And to negate it, don't speak, don't talk, don't go, don't stop. Really simple in Hebrew, in English, right? Stop, don't stop. Talk, don't talk. Speak, don't speak. It's very easy in English. Those of you who've studied other languages know it can get increasingly more complicated. Sometimes there's a whole tense and its own conjugation. Sometimes it's even more complicated than that. We're going to look at how it works in modern Hebrew. And I'm going to illustrate how important it is to understand this by literally illustrating every example there is of how we use commands in modern Hebrew with using signs that I pulled straight off the internet. And that's going to give you also a clue of the homework assignment for those who join us on Wednesday. But let's get started. And we've done this class in the past, but we're going to do it slightly different today. We're going to certainly reshare with you the spreadsheet that we've used in the past. But today, we're going to use our trusty friend, the PowerPoint, or the spreadsheets, or the slides, however you want to call it. All right, so I said today is commands in your commanding voice. Those of you who are familiar, whether it's Jewish tradition, or you've kept up reading the Bible, whatever you know, commandments are that word. And this is the word that is equivalent. In fact, we're going to look it up before we even start. I'm going to pull up the word, in fact, how we say a command in Hebrew. And many of you already know this word, but we're still going to look it up. Show it to you using one of our favorite free resources here at Cafe Oleh, namely pearlin.com. Right? We love this website. It gives you full conjugation as well as words that are related both by form, which we're going to talk about it in a few weeks from now, as well as the shoresh, the three-letter root. In this case, tsadi vav he. Tsadi vav he gives us words like, for example, tzav. Tzav, as you see here, is a command or an order. For example, on October 7th, a tzav shmone was issued. Tzav shmone is the emergency mass call-up from the IDF, from the Israeli Defense Forces. That is an emergency call-up for everyone, conscripted and reserve soldiers. From that, we get other words. For example, tzivui, which is what we're going to be talking about today, which is the imperative form, right? You see here at the bottom, imperative grammar. And then this pesky word. This word is a pet peeve of mine and many, many, many people because it gets translated incorrectly one too many times. The word mitzvah in Hebrew, be it biblical Hebrew, medieval Hebrew, or modern Hebrew, only means one thing, and that is a commandment. It is not, repeat, not a good deed. Mitzvah only means a commandment. If you want to say a good deed in Hebrew, you literally translate good deed, ma'aseh tov. But a mitzvah may be a good deed in action, but a mitzvah only means a commandment in modern Hebrew, as well as biblical, as well as medieval. With that, we're going to look at the tzivui, coming from the same root as mitzvah, the imperative. That's the fancy word simply for a command. Okay? So, as I said, command in Hebrew, as opposed to English, right? Commands in Hebrew, what we call the imperative, the fancy term, right, is as much a mood as it is its own tense. What do I mean by mood? We use the word mood in language to mean things that, for example, are wishes or are, in this case, commands or hopes, things that are conveyed by a connection of words as well as the word itself, but also in certain constructs. It's not necessarily its own tense. For those of you who have a little bit of linguistics behind you or know other languages, think of this like the subjunctive, right? Where you're hoping for something or wishing for something or negating something, or commanding something, or disliking something. That's what we talk about when we mean a mood. Versus a tense. A tense is in the sense of it has its own conjugation. We conjugate it in a very specific way. Hebrew for commands does both, and you're going to see examples of how it's used in both cases, right? And as we just talked about, as opposed to English, where we have speak and don't speak, and that's it. That is the full breadth of the commands, right? We can add other helper verbs. Of course, we can say, you need to do something, or you must do something. But otherwise, at its core is simply speak and don't speak. Modern Hebrew has its own tense for imperatives, for commands. We also use three other constructs, in fact, and we're going to look at each of them. And like I said, for each example, you're going to see when they're used, why they're used, and examples of them. So let's get into the oldest and the most unique one, which is considered its own tense. This is called the imperative tense, right? And the imperative tense in Hebrew, as it says here, is a distinct conjugation, okay? Meaning it has its own conjugation tables. Like past tense, present tense, and future tense, there is the imperative tense. It is its own conjugation. And it only exists in the second person, because think of what a command is. It's telling someone directly to do something or not do something, right? So it's only going to be you, singular, and you, plural. You, singular, has two different conjugations, depending if it's masculine or feminine. And in modern Hebrew, the you, plural, is combined, whether it's only men, only female, only male, or combined group. Okay, so there are three in modern Hebrew. What happened in modern Hebrew? So one of the things that has changed in modern Hebrew, there's a couple things that make modern Hebrew distinct from medieval and biblical Hebrew. One of them is the imperative, because in the imperative, we no longer use the imperative for every single verb under the sun. We just don't. One of the reasons, there's a couple, but one of the reasons it was deemed too harsh. And so what has happened is the imperative actually becomes softened. And you'll see the examples that we have here are, as I wrote here, are used when the person you're talking to or commanding has agency. They have the ability to act on their own and can change their behavior on their own accord. What do I mean by that? Let's look at some of these. First, at the top left, sakanat hachlaka lech bezehirut. So first off, like a lot of signage, is going to be in the imperative or in some form of a command. In this case, this one's in the imperative tense. And you can tell by the picture at the top, that red triangle, right? There's a whole series of emergency insignia, logos that are used around the world to indicate something regardless of what language they're used in. Everyone can understand when they see that someone is slipping, right? And the red triangle indicates warning. So what does it say in Hebrew? Sakanat hachlaka. A sakana is danger, right? Hachlaka is slipping or slippage, if we're going to use the fancy term for it, right? So danger of slipping, sakanat hachlaka. This is a compound noun of two nouns together, combining into one thought of danger of slipping. Lech bezehirut. Lech is our first example of the imperative tense. And many of you probably know the word lech already, right? Lech is the imperative tense of the verb lalechet, to go. Lech is second person singular masculine, lech. Okay, lech, lechi, lechu. In this case, lech bezehirut, go or tread is another way that it's often translated in English, but go, bizhirut, with caution or cautiously, right? Danger of slipping, go cautiously or go carefully, but zihirut is better translated as cautiously. Okay, and we're going to see that word zihirut again at the top right. Se'u bezehirut. Se'u is the imperative tense second person plural of the verb linsoa. Linsoa is to travel a long distance. Or in this example, as you can see here, there's both a car, there's tread marks on the ground, and that is rain falling. Se'u bezehirut, travel with caution. Travel carefully. Okay, saying when it rains out, travel carefully or travel with caution. Se'u bezehirut. Right? And you see each time, exclamation point, right? The imperative or the command is simply the exclamation point. Let's look at another one that doesn't have an exclamation point, but still uses the imperative. Sapru lanu. איזה ספר הייתם לוקחים איתכם לאי בודד? ספרו לנו. ספרו, second person plural form of the imperative tense of the verb לספר, to tell. Right, so far we've had danger of slipping, tread carefully or move carefully, travels carefully. Now we have sapru lanu, tell us. Right, there's no exclamation point, but we still use the imperative because we are asking someone, we are demanding someone to do something different, right? That's the point of all three that we've seen so far. Do something different. Sapu lanu, tell us. Eze sefer, which book, haytem lochim itchem, would you take with you, le'i boded, to a stranded island, to a desert island? Okay, so three examples we've had so far of the imperative tense. Lech, se'u, and sapru. At the top of the hour, I'll show you again pe'alim, and I'll show you where the imperative form shows on that verb conjugation table. Okay, and then finally, we have at the bottom, this one you're going to see a lot in Hebrew and in Israel in general, where it says here, sicha ktsara v'akvisa nekiya, a small call or a short call, v'akvisa nekiya, and your laundry is clean. It rhymes in Hebrew, so it's a nice tagline, sicha ktsara v'akvisa nekiya. And then it says, pashut chaygu. Pashut means simply or simple, and then this word chaygu. We've talked about chaygu in the context of automated menus, and you should know it's an automated menu because now you have a phone number appearing. Pashut chaygu means simply dial, and this is the number to call for your kvisa being nikiya or your laundry being clean. Okay, so 4 examples of using the imperative tense. Lech, se'u, sapru, chaygu. All 4 of these, excuse me. Again, this is one of many forms we're going to see of the command in the day, and one of the 4 that you're going to see on a regular basis. Okay. One of you, or probably you are already asking in the Q&A, hopefully in the Q&A and not in the chat, because remember, I'm not looking at the chat right now, and I won't till tomorrow. Why are some of these in singular and why are some of these in plural? We're going to answer that in a little bit when we look at another way we can do commands. But notice that some of these, like lech, is in singular, and the rest of these are all in plural. This, sakanat hachlaka lech bezehirut, right, is in the singular. It's implied for everyone, but it's interesting that it's in singular and it's only in singular masculine. Whereas the others, all 3 of them, on the right-hand side and at the bottom, are all in the plural gender inclusive. So it's meaning for everyone to do this. I don't think this is saying, and it's certainly not saying, only men or only males need to worry about slipping. Rather, like in many things in Hebrew, it's using, and it'll say this, for the example, if you're looking at a help wanted sign or a job inquiry or a job notice, it'll often say at the bottom, the notice was written in using the male pronouns. However, it applies to women as well. It's the same idea here, that they are trying to individualize it, but not trying to genderize it. Hebrew is inherently gendered, but it's not to say only men should worry about slipping. It's trying to make an individual warning to people to tread carefully. Okay, let's look at, we've now looked at the imperative tense. Let's look at one that you see, number 1, much more often, and number 2, many of you are already familiar with how to use, which is future tense. One of the things in modern Hebrew is that we use less the imperative tense and much more the future tense, right? The future, you shall or you will do something, second person, right? More commonly, the future tense in second person is employed as a command. As opposed to the modern version of the imperative tense, the modern tense is more forceful in demanding someone to do something. That may seem counterintuitive, right? We think, oh my God, there's this one tense that's just about exclamation points. That must be harder and more harsh. It's almost like both of them have come 180 degrees in what they mean. The future tense is not only more common because people use the future tense more often than they use the imperative, and thus it can be used in both ways. It's become to be harsher and more direct and telling someone forcibly what to do. So here are two examples. The top one comes from a great graphic design artist who some of you may be familiar with their line of work called Hapolania. Hapolania means the Polish woman, referring to a Polish mother. In Hebrew, in Israeli society, if you want to joke about the Jewish mother and the Jewish mother guilt, we say Ima Polania, the Polish mother, right? It's not just the Jewish mother, it's specifically a Polish mother. And so this line of design called Hapolania makes t-shirts, it makes decals, it makes magnets, it makes houseware with all these very stereotypical Jewish mother expressions. So for example, ta'aminu li, kshani echas atem kvar ted'u. Ta'aminu li. Here's our example of the future tense. Believe me. And it's not just one person believing me, ta'aminu li, meaning you plural believe me. Kshani echas, when I'll be angry, atem kvar tedu, you will already know. Okay? Ta'aminu li is our command here. Believe me. Right? Another example is a popular game at the bottom right we talked about a couple of weeks ago in English, but instead here it is in Hebrew, tagidu bli lahagid. Tagidu is again future tense second person plural from lehagid, to tell. So this is tagidu bli lehagid, right? That verb appears twice here, once in the future and second in the infinitive. If lehagid means to tell, what is this saying? Tell without telling, right? And what is it? It's a game where you have to guess the word that the person is holding in their card without giving away certain words, right? Or you have to get the other team to guess the word without giving it away, right? This is the equivalent of the game Taboo in English. The word is microwave, but you can't use the word cook. You can't use the word microwave or the word cook. How do you describe to get someone to say microwave without using those words and maybe a few others? That's this game in Hebrew. Tagidu bli lagi. Say it without saying it. Right? Because that's the name of the game. This is the much more well-known tense for saying commands. You'll recognize this one much more frequently for sure. And there's another reason why we use this one. First off, because we have the future tense. And so this is doing double duty, but now it's actually going to do triple duty. Future tense, commands, ta'aminu li, believe me, tagidu, say it or tell it. And now it's going to do a third thing, which is it's going to negate a command. It's technically incorrect to say negate a command, so please don't come after me in the comments. It's just an easier way to say it, or negative command. This is telling someone not to do something. Right? Don't do this. Don't do that. In modern Hebrew, we have a unique way to do this where we're again going to use the future tense, but we're instead going to use an article that is only used to negate commands, which is al. We talked about this word al a couple weeks ago, actually last week when we did our don't say this, say that instead. And we talked about words that also are that sound alike and are misspelled, like el, al. This is a great example. Al with an aleph is only used in modern Hebrew to make a negative command. So for example, as you see here on the right, another one from Polania, al tig'u ze le'orchim. Don't touch, exclamation point, you plural, don't touch, ze le'orchim. This is for guests. This is for the guests, excuse me. Okay? Al tig'u ze le'orchim. Or you see at the bottom right, a very clever and a little bit of a tongue twister. Al tireh ve'al tira, referring to two different things that are illustrated in this picture from our friends over at the Academy of the Hebrew Language. Al tireh comes from the verb lirot. Lirot meaning to shoot. So al tireh, don't shoot. The al tira, this one many of you will probably know. Al tira, and don't fear. Don't be afraid. Right? In Hebrew, they're spelled very similarly and they sound very similar. Al tireh ve'al tira. Two different verbs, right? But they're both using the same construct, just like al tig'u. Al followed by the future tense, meaning don't do something. Okay. Those of you who remember the first weeks after, or the first week after October 7th, and I believe it was the second speech, it was either the first or the second speech of President Biden, and his famous line where he said, don't, right? And how is that translated in Hebrew? Al. Al is not a word on its own, but al in that context was understood. Okay? And further understood why we say al and not lo. Look at the bottom here. If we use the verb lichtov, to write, and we use the command form future tense, tichtevu, write, plural, right? You all write, tichtevu, atem tichtevu, exclamation point. If you say lo tichtevu, it translates as it says here, you will not write. But if you say al tichtevu, that means don't write. Look at the difference in English, folks. That's what we mean when we say the command form or the imperative. Lo tichtevu is not a command. You will not write is not a command in English or in any other language. But don't write, exclamation point, is absolutely a command. In this case, in Hebrew, al tichtevu means don't write. Okay? That's how al is so important to say when you're saying to someone, don't do something, or you're telling them, or you're commanding them, more particularly, don't do something. Okay? So far we've done the most direct ways, the fundamental ways of expressing and creating a command, right? The imperative form, which has its own conjugation, or using the future tense of a verb. Okay, most of the time we can get away with using the future tense. There are some examples that only use the imperative, but by and large, you're going to be using the future tense. If you haven't learned the future tense, now you know there's even more reason to learn it because you get to boss people around. Well, sort of. But if we expand the definition of what is a command, when do we use commands? When do we see commands in everyday life? We understand there's actually two more examples of when we use this, and it uses a completely different form. Okay, it's a completely different formula than what we see now, but it's still conveying to do something or not to do something. And it's not anything other than that. It's guiding our behavior, right? And the best part about these next two ways, folks, you don't have to conjugate a thing. It's the best part of these next two examples. There's no imperative tense, there's no future tense. It's only the infinitive. There is no conjugation whatsoever. So if you're at a beginner's level or you're still having issues with conjugating plurality and gender and time and space and all of that, guess what? You get to boss people around and you don't have to worry about conjugating whatsoever. And it sounds super formal. Let's look at the two examples. The first one is using our two good friends that we've already encountered and you've already encountered, yesh and ein. When we learn possessives, right? How to possess something, not in any supernatural way, but how to own something, right? We learn the words yesh and ein. Yesh means there is, ein means there's not. Well, guess what? It's got another meaning that you probably haven't learned yet unless you've learned imperatives, which is if you put yesh or ein at the beginning of before an imperative verb, if you put yesh or ein at the beginning of an infinitive verb to do something, it means one must or one must not do something. Okay? So for example, let's look at the top. יש להחזיק במעקה בטיחות. You see a stick figure, and he's holding a stick. Yesh lahachzik. If you don't know what any of these words mean, first off, you see yesh, followed by the infinitive. I know it's the infinitive because there's that lamed right there. And I know because Jay's telling me this is a sign telling me to do something, I can gauge that that is a command. And that's an infinitive verb as part of it. The guy is holding a rail, not just any rail, ma'akeh, a ma'akeh b'tichut, the safety rail, right? Think of you're walking up or downstairs and there's a rail to hold on to. That's what he's doing here. So now you understand the picture. You can then reverse translate lehachzik, coming from the same root as the word chazak, strong. Lehachzik is to hold on to something. So if we put this all together, yesh lahachzik b'ma'akeh b'tichut, one must hold on to the safety rail. Okay? Understanding that yesh plus the infinitive means one must do something. What's the opposite of that? Our other word, ein. Ein lahachnis la'ulam mazon v'shtia. Okay? Again, let the warning sign illustrated for you. You see a classic picture of food and drink with a big slash through it. Guess what? There's a reason why these are called universal signage, because they're universal. You don't need to know any of the Hebrew to know that picture means no food or drink allowed, right? But how do we say that in Hebrew? Ein lehachnis. Instead of yesh lachzik, now we have ein lehachnis. Lachnis, the same root as lehikanes, to enter, or beit knesset, or hakneset, or any of these other words that we have with it. Ein lahachnis la'ulam. Ulam is a hall, H-A-L-L. One may not, one must not enter. Ein lahachnis, one must not enter la'ulam, the hall, with mazon ushtia. Mazon, food, shtia, drink. Okay. If I didn't know what any of those words means, I know exactly from the picture. So it's already helping us there. Same with the one over here. Azhara. Azhara is warning. Okay? You can translate it as warning, danger, whatever it means to grab your attention. Ein lahachnot o lachsom et hasha'al. Azhara, warning, danger. Ein lahachanot. Right? Again, that word ein, normally that means there is not, but in this case, we know it's making a negative command. Don't do something. Lahachnot. If you don't know what lahachnot is, many of you asked me to do a driver's lesson. This is a great example of why oftentimes that's not needed, because there is universal signage with regards to driving. In this case, you see this picture here of the red circle with the slash in the middle, and it's otherwise blue. That is a signage of no parking, right? So now that I know that, ein lahachnot means no parking. There is no parking. One may not park. One must not park. O lachsom, meaning one must not park or block. Lachsom is to block. So it means both ein lahachnot ve'ein lachsom, and one must not block et hasha'al, the gate. Okay, so three signs, and as I wrote here, because yesh and ein followed by the infinitive doesn't conjugate based on plurality, based on gender, based on anything else, right? This is inclusive. It's inclusive gender-wise, it's inclusive plurality-wise, which is why many warning signs or directive signs or anything like that are using this formula for the general public, right? All of these are signs I took from a company that creates general public warning signs or advisory signs, right? Because they all are in that form. One must not or one must do something. Yesh lachzik b'ma'akeh b'tichut. One must hold the safety rail. One may not bring food or drink into the hall. One may not or cannot or not or will not park or block the gate. Park at or block the gate. Okay. Very popular form that you see here. And then finally, Our other form that uses the infinitive is al. This one is very formal, but it's also very adaptive in that you can say this to someone, not just in the second person, right? Everything we've seen up till now, the commands are in second person. Do something, don't do something. Speak, don't speak, right? And then we got to al and, al, yesh and ein. One must not or one must. Al allows us to do a lot more. It allows us to do first person, second person, and third person alike. We must, they must, I must, he must, she must. All those things that we use must or have to, if we understand commands as a much larger family of things, we can use the preposition al. And we can use it in a couple different ways. We can simply say al followed by the subject, or we can do the declensions, the quote-unquote conjugations of al. Many of you, for example, who are Jewishly literate, you know one of the most famous prayers from the High Holiday service was so popular that it became used at the end of every service of every day of the year. And it begins with our word here, al. The clue is in this picture. This isn't the actual prayer. This is another great example of it, which we'll translate in a second. But many of you know this one, right? Aleinu. Aleinu doesn't mean on us. What's the first line of Aleinu? Aleinu l'shabeach ladon akol. We must praise God up above, or the God of everything. Right? Aleinu l'shabeach. That's what we're talking about here. Aleinu l'shabeach. We must praise. Okay? That's understood in modern Hebrew, and that's what it means. We must do something. It is a command in a very more general sense. It's not saying praise exclamation point, it's saying we must praise. And that's the power of this al plus the infinitive, because we can tweak it either by using the declensions of al, alai, alecha, alav, aleha, and I'll show you that table in a second, or we can add a subject afterwards. Al kulam l'shabeach. Everyone must praise, right? If kulam is everyone, al kulam, it is on everyone to do something, right? We have that expression in English, but it really is must do something. In this case, alenu lehiot hashinui she'anu rotzim lirot ba'olam. We must be, alenu lehiot, we must be hashinui, the change, she'anu rotzim, which we want, lirot, to see, ba'olam, in the world. Okay, very well-known phrase, always attributed to 500 different people. This is how you would say it in Hebrew. Aleinu lehiot hashinui. We must be the change. Okay, and to negate this, we must not be the change, God forbid. Aleinu lo lehiot hashinui. Okay, so two other ways to broaden the definition of negating, using yesh or ein with the infinitive, or al in the infinitive. Okay, but all four of these in modern Hebrew are considered the exclamation point of Hebrew. We do use exclamation points, but as you see here, some of these examples don't come with it, but it's understood in how you're saying it. It is a directive, it is a command, it is the imperative to tell someone to do something or not do something. Okay, and then finally, before we look at two other resources that we're going to use in understanding this concept, bo and lech. Bo and lech are both forms of the imperative tense. Bo coming from the verb lavo, to come, and lech, as we already saw, coming from the verb lalechet, to go. The commands bo and lech can be further used to make commands, right? They in of themselves are commands. Bo, come, lech, go. You probably heard this before, right? Boena, come here. Or lech, get out of here, go, exclamation points, right? Bo nipagesh, come, let's meet, right? That's the very formal way to translate it. And this gets around what we've been talking about up until our last two examples, right? That imperative and future tense are inherently second person. Bo is second person. Bo, boi, bo. Bo nipagesh is using bo in the second person plural, but then it's saying nipagesh, we will meet. Putting this all together, you are more than asking, you're telling a group of people to meet up, yourself included. Come, let's meet up, right? We don't say that in English, right? You say, let's meet up. This is how you say that in Hebrew. Bo nipagesh, let's meet up. There's a very popular TV show in Israel, Oleh, come eat with me, where you take a group of people and they rotate among their homes, and each time they host and create a meal for the other people in the group. Right? Oleh, come eat with me. Here, Boni Pagesh is including you in a command. Right? Or you can use the word like this. Bo al tagzim. Bo in this context is more like come on. If bo means come, exclamation point, bo, when you say it like that, that short down and your face usually goes down with it, bo, means come on, right? The equivalent of, as we do here in Hebrew, the nonverbal of drawing down your eye, like, give me a break, bo, come on. Al tagzim, don't over exaggerate, right? Lagzim means to exaggerate. Okay. Versus lech, and we talked about lech a few weeks ago when we did blessings, wishes, and curses. Lech la'azazel, go to hell. I didn't write the equivalent of go blank yourself. Those of you who joined us in that class for conversational, you learned how to say that. Lech la'azazel means go to hell in Hebrew. Azazel does not translate directly to hell. A much longer conversation to be had, right? But these terms can also be their own commands and create other ones as well. With that, let me just share with you two other resources that, of course, I'm going to share with you. One is our spreadsheet that we used in previous classes when we talked about these forms. And this is a much easier way to see all the different declensions there are using several different verbs. So for example, if you want to say, right, speak, go, get moving, move, stop, all those things, and you see where they are relevant. So the infinitive to do something, the imperative using the imperative tense versus the second person versus negative. You're going to see some examples here when we use one versus the other. And you're also going to see when we use our other constructions like yesh or ein or al, right? Speak, one must not speak, you must speak, and so forth. Okay? All here for you. You'll get a copy of this as well. And finally, let me pull up pe'alim.com just so you can see what they have to say about the imperative. So let's do the verb linsoa. Linsoa means to go, right? To go a long distance, to travel. We look at the verb linsoa, right? You click on any verb in pe'alim.com, you get the conjugation of linsoa. Gives you the root, gives you any funny business it does with regards to conjugation, tells you the meaning, tells you singular or plural, masculine, feminine, present tense, which is also the participle, the past tense, the future tense, which is important when you're saying, for example, don't go, al tisa, right? And then we get to imperative, right? Just as we talked about, you saw before the plural, right? But here's the singular to a male, sa, to a female, se'i. The one that we saw in our ad, se'u, as in se'u bezehirut. Drive carefully, drive with caution. And then you see here one at the end, and it says satna, right? Satna, two women. And then you see the moment I click on it, I hover over it, an asterisk, and it says in modern language, the masculine form is generally used. Yes, there is a form of plural, all women, all feminine, that is known in Hebrew, but it is seldom used and seldom used outside of being very formal. And it's rarely taught, but know that it does exist. It's there. When you see that asterisk, it means that it's not used as often. In this case, for sure, in the imperative, it's not used as often. Excuse me. Okay. So two great resources you'll get in addition to the PowerPoint of recognizing and using the imperative. For those of you who are going to join us for Wednesday's class in Cafe Oleh, for Cafe Oleh Conversations, where we break you into breakout rooms to practice what we learn, you're going to be tasked with bringing an example of using the command form. One of the things I wanted to do, but we're already out of time, is bringing you examples not just of signage, but in music. Not just because I know you love Israeli music, I certainly do, and there are great examples of all of these different forms in Hebrew music, in Israeli music using Hebrew. Whether it's a song like, for example, Balbeli Oto, confuse him, or Tagidi Shetov, say it's good, right? We have lots of examples in just the titles of songs that use our commands. So one of the things you're going to be doing on Wednesday and coming to class is finding a piece of a sign like I did here, or music, or some example in real time of one of these forms of the command being used and sharing it. Okay. With that, let me start answering some questions. Before I do, first off, toda rabah to everyone who's joined. We are currently at 320 participants, so thank you all. We are still the biggest Hebrew class in the world, so toda rabah benet. I told you about benet last week. This is an example when you can use it. Truly, as I said. Next week's class, we're going to continue with finding your voice, and we're going to do something that for many of us, especially native English speakers, is counterintuitive. We're going to be learning about the passive voice. And we're going to be learning something we've talked about here before, but is always worth repeating. Passive in Hebrew, not to sound too whatever here, passive is actually much more active in modern Hebrew. What do I mean? The passive form, the passive voice in Hebrew is actually considered a higher form of Hebrew. And whereas some of you may be resurfacing in your brain some trauma from growing up and learning in being told in English, don't say to be done or to be received, say it in the active form. In Hebrew, when possible, the passive is actually considered better. We're going to look exactly how that works. How do we conjugate for it? And some examples in everyday life that we use it to understand how that works. It is much higher Hebrew, but it's important to know as you're working on your own respective levels of fluency, this is one of what I would say is an important measure of success. So much so that those of you who join us on Wednesday, you know that one of the criteria in moving from one level to another is if you know the passive voice, and that's much at the higher end between levels 3 and 4. So with that, Wednesday's class this week is going to be about bringing examples of commands, as well as some conversation prompts from me. And next week, all about the passive voice and how important it is. With that, let me get to some Q&A in the Q&A. Is pikud then the verbal order while tzav is written? I'm confused. Kuda is an order. Think of it like a command. And tzav is also a command. They both come from different roots. For our purpose here, tzav means a command in a written sense, for sure, coming from the same root as mitzvah. But they both can translate as command. Great question. And the word is pkuda, not pikud. Pikud is the command post or the command core. Kuda is the actual order to do something. Someone has a problem receiving notices for the Monday class. Please email us once again, hebrew@nbn.org.il. My staff, my colleagues rather, Rena and Chevy and Shira do all the tech behind the scenes. They're the best people to get in touch if you're not receiving the notices. Is there an old song, Al Tira? There's it's actually not just an old song, it's also a religious song. Al Tira Yisrael, Al Tira ki gur aryeh alo ata. Do not fear Israel, for you are a lion cub. Very famous song. Um, what about the use of Baal instead of Al? Is this only in biblical Hebrew? We do not use the word Baal in modern Hebrew, except in very, very rare literary cases. But universal rule, if you want to say a negative command, don't do something, the word is Al with an Aleph, followed by the future tense. I see people wanting to say about na. Na is not in the same family as what we're talking about. Na is a synonym of the word bevakasha, please, right? If you want to really stretch the rules of commands, yes, it is a form of a command because you're telling someone what to do. But for our definition and in Hebrew in general, it's not considered part of the family of commands of the imperative. Again, yesh and ein, using that construct means do not do something, right? In the form of a command. You can say lo lehachnis, but that's not a command, and that's not the form we use. Okay? Um, Any truth to the informal rule that the imperative can be used if the form is monosyllabic or in binyan PL. There are more technical rules as to when we use the imperative versus the future tense, but in general, you'll see that the ones that we use the imperative are often things about choice rather than really telling where we're giving the other person agency or we're acknowledging the agency versus a much more direct form of things. You'll hear sometimes people using both of them. It's usually more outdated to use the imperative across the board. You more use the future tense. I just finished Ulpan, and they said that second person was a softer, gentler command than the imperative, but you told us the opposite. Increasingly, it's the opposite. Mainly because we use the second person much more often. Yes, if you say shtok to someone versus tishtok, shtok sounds harder also because it's older. So it does come with a little bit of generational trauma to it, cross-generational trauma of being told by a parent or a grandparent or a teacher, be quiet, versus tishtok. But tishtok is still a pretty demanding thing to do, telling someone to shut up. They both have that same meaning. Tishtok is just used more often. Also, again, because if you can only use three tenses versus four to mean the same thing, you're going to use three. Okay. Let me just see, we have a few other classes. All right. Boni pagesh is not formal. Someone's asking if boni pagesh is formal. How do we say let's get together? Boni pagesh, when we translate it as come, let's get together, is formal because that's how you say it in English. But in Hebrew, we just say it would be the equivalent of let's meet up. Boni pagesh, let's meet up. But if I'm translating it literally into English, it sounds formal. Come, let's meet up, or come, we will meet up. Boni pagesh simply means let's meet up. That's how you would say it. Let's meet up. That let's is the equivalent of bo. Okay. With that, I think we are out of time, and let me just make sure I've got other questions that I got this class. Would od be future also be a command? No. Od works in biblical Hebrew. It works in poetic Hebrew. It does not work in future tense. I know you want to say od yishama Meharei Yehuda is a future hope, wish. But it is not a command and it's not a form that's used in modern Hebrew. All right, the four that we went over today are the main ones that we use in modern Hebrew. With that, Toda Rabba, thank you all for joining. This recording will go up in the next day along with the slides that you saw, the spreadsheet with all the declensions and conjugations, and a link back to our good friend at paolim.com. Hope you will all join us for Wednesday's class, 8 p.m. If you haven't signed up separately for that, please do so on the Nefesh B'Nefesh website. Otherwise, I will see you all here next week for talking all about the passive voice. Until then, Toda Rabba and Lehitraot.